Yeah, it's a really tough series because I really don't see any scenario where the Pacers win. But at the same time, I feel kind of priced out with the Thunder. I feel if you didn't grab Oklahoma City at some point in the regular season or some point earlier in the playoffs when maybe they were trailing in a series, you're really kind of left without many avenues to play this. I wouldn't want to be laying, 2.5 games at the number that you have to do it. I don't think it's worth, the minus 135 juice or so. I think Indiana, you could say what you want to say about them getting here. Maybe if they lose game one to the Knicks, they don't win that series, but they are a good basketball team. And there are ways for them to win some of these games. I think especially early in the series, maybe, you get a game where Rick Carlisle just kind of out executes Mark Dagnall as a coach, where, Dagnall is unbelievable as a regular season coach, has done a lot of good things in this postseason, has also done a lot of bad things in this postseason. So I think maybe in games 1 and 2, you see a really good effort from Indiana somewhere. Maybe they steal a game. I also think that for as good as Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams have been in these playoffs, there probably will be a game in Indiana where they just don't shoot that well and the Pacers win it. This is just a series where I'd probably take over 5.5 at plus money odds, not thinking that the Pacers are going to win, just thinking they could extend the series a little bit.
And then when you look at Indiana, right, you look at a team that through the first 2 rounds had the highest effective field goal percentage we had seen from a playoff team. They continue to play at that pace. Now their efficiency and their wins is off the charts when you're looking at the rate at which they hit shots, their offensive efficiency mark, their half-court offensive efficiency marks. It's incredible. And you do wonder against a defensive-oriented team like Oklahoma City, who is really geared to play this backcourt wing-oriented team that can switch almost everything, that can get physical with them, if that starts to kind of dry up here a little bit. And so that to me is kind of the key. Again, they're much better than the Miami Heat team that made that run. But when you looked at that run for Miami, there were so many different things you could point to. Like, I don't know, man, like that shouldn't keep happening. That shouldn't keep happening, or at least to that rate, that shouldn't keep happening. And I think that this might be a similar case where it dries up against a defensive team that is going to just be a pain in the ass for them every turn of the way.
Do you think the Thunder, just matchup wise, it presents a lot of problems? Like, I think Chet Holmgren is going to be kind of a supersized version of what we just saw with Karl Anthony Towns in the Knicks series. I think he's going to be able to kind of space the floor with Miles Turner on him and then drive to the basket a lot. Like, he is really good at putting the ball on the floor and getting to the rim. So a lot of what we just saw Towns do in that series that was successful against Indiana, we should see Holmgren do the same, but Holmgren is not going to be the same defensive liability on the other end of the floor. And I also do think that, like, the way we've seen Lou Dort and Alex Caruso kind of defend up and guard some of the bigger forwards, that's going to be a problem for now Pascal Siakam, as it was for Julius Randle, Nikola Jokic. Those guys really push you out of the paint and just get you off your spots. They don't get called for a lot of fouls for doing it. So that is the real challenge for this Pacers team playing against the Thunder is, the physicality. Indiana is also not a great rebounding team, and I know Oklahoma City probably won't play double big too much. Like, I don't think they're going to want to risk getting run off the floor with Hartenstein and Holmgren out there, but they're big all throughout the lineup, whereas Indiana isn't. So I do think there's a chance that they really just kind of dominate in terms of getting loose balls, getting rebounds, all the little things.
Yeah, so I think the easy one, right, is like going to these series spreads, Matt. Like, for example, if you really think they're going to kick Indiana's ass, minus 2.5 games is about minus 130, minus 125, depending on where you look. And I think that's probably a fair way to look at it. I think the thing that would give you some pause, and I think 2.5 is probably the way to go here. And you can go exact games, right? But I would be wary of playing a sweep. The only reason is, as we know, they have not covered a game on the road in this postseason. Their shooting numbers have been abysmal away from home, especially when you look at them offensively. In this postseason, in terms of offensive rating for Oklahoma City, averaging 108.8 points per 100 possessions in non-garbage time. They've been outscored by 6.2 points per 100 possessions in non-garbage time. And so that gives me some pause in expecting them to sweep because, look, it's a small sample size, but the sample size tells us that they're going to struggle in these road games and potentially drop one. So I think it would make some sense to ask them to win in 5 games, whether you're playing that exact or whether you're laying that 2.5, because that still gets you there if they win in 5.
The question now, Nick, is there a weakness they can exploit, and what would that be if Indiana is to make this thing more than just a sweep or a gentleman's sweep?
I think it's a really good question, and I think you set it up well. And obviously, Indy has been exploiting those weaknesses in the Eastern Conference. I think you can easily say OKC has been doing the same, perhaps with a tougher road, depending on how you value teams like Minnesota and Denver. Look, I respect the hell out of this Indy team reluctantly, Ben, who has done nothing but terrorize our poor Milwaukee Bucks over these last couple of years. I've had to come around and just kind of accept the reality that this might be the best team in the Eastern Conference, but I still look at this as OKC's finals to lose in just about every way. I think the odds tell the story. This team is 80-18 on the season, which is ridiculous. I think we can say all these platitudes about the Indiana Pacers, which are all true, but I think in a lot of ways OKC does everything that Indiana does, just at a higher level, right? And I think the one big thing you look at, and a huge advantage going into that Minnesota series that OKC had. Part of the reason I didn't think they would have a whole lot of trouble was that Minnesota was a high turnover team, not only in the regular season, but in the playoffs. And obviously we saw that come to fruition. But the thing about Indiana is, they take care of the ball, right? And, I think the one thing that OKC has done, well, many things that they've done, but I think the thing that stuck out most defensively is that they just force so many turnovers. It doesn't seem to matter who the opponent is. They're forcing 18 opponent turnovers per game during this playoff run, which is the most by any team in a playoff run since the 1996 Chicago Bulls.
No, I don't think it is. Like, I think that they've been such a force at home, as you guys well know. Like, the shooting numbers go way up. They shoot under 30% from three away from home. They're shooting like 37% from beyond the arc or better at home. Offensive rating spikes. Defensive rating is incredible. Mike, they've held all of their opponents at home in this postseason to under a point per possession, or overall 98.9. It's been awesome. Their defective field goal percentage defensively we were floating around 45%. They've been great, and we know that they can force teams into turnovers. I think they've almost been untouchable at home. Covering a big number, that is another question. But when you're talking about what you're doing, which is asking them to win outright, I don't think that's really that crazy.
If you're looking at it, I think most people are naturally going to gravitate to the series games market, since that's pretty close to an even money proposition. It's minus 135 to go under 5.5 games. And by the way, you'd much rather bet that than the Thunder to cover the 2.5 games, since you got to lay minus 140 on that. Since that's your closest thing here to minus 110, Nick, what side would you be looking at as far as a 5.5 game prop?
Yeah, I think that is the natural pivot here. I mean, if you want to go over to the correct score markets, I don't mind, dabbling in Thunder and 5 at plus 250, Thunder and 4, not far behind at plus 260. I think this is a 5-game series. I would lean on that under 5.5. I have enough respect for Indiana that I would be surprised if this is a sweep. And, there aren't that many finals matchups that we can even compare this to. If you look at the last decade, last 10 to 15 years in terms of, OKC being this heavy of a favorite, like the only other teams that are kind of in that neighborhood, and this was even beyond that, were, the 2017 and 2018 Kevin Durant Warriors when they went up against the Cavaliers. I mean, they were closer to minus 2,000 in those final series, which is a whole different level of stacking the deck for that Golden State team. But even one of those years that the Cavs did take a game off that Warriors team, and we've seen OKC, for as dominant as they've been, obviously the Nuggets took them to 7 games. Minnesota blew them out in Game 3. There was a game even in that Memphis series where they were down 20 plus at the half. So it feels like they're bulletproof. It feels like this team is impenetrable. I think they could drop a game.
I also think the market's kind of getting this right. I think some spots we've seen this open up like 229.5 or up to 230.5. I would play this over. Look, the Pacers just got done with a series where their opponent didn't want to run with them, right? They didn't want to get up and down the floor. The Thunder will invite that havoc. They would be more than willing to do that with them as well. They're capable of doing that with them. So if Indiana wants to speed this thing up, I think from a possession standpoint, we might see a little bit of a quicker series. And Oklahoma City is going to be more than willing, especially when they force turnovers. They're going to get off and run. They're going to be willing to get out and transition as well. And so we saw New York kind of get a little uncomfortable in the games that got a little bit quicker. I think that this is going to be one where the Thunder will willingly invite whatever style Indiana wants to play. And I think it makes some sense that you're going to be able to go over the total here. So that's what I liked here. If you can still get over 230.5, I think it's still a playable number. I know most spots open 229.5, or just wait, because we have seen, as we get closer to game times, we've seen the market buy back on some of these line moves. And so you could sit back and wait, but I think 230.5 still playable over.
Yeah, I think the total was something I was looking forward to. Both of these teams, I think, are used to dictating pace, forcing the opponent to adjust to them. And now you have two teams going up against each other who both feel like they have that advantage. I think I trust OKC a little bit more in that respect. I think the Thunder are more comfortable playing at different paces. Even if you just look game by game at the advanced game logs over at Basketball Reference, one of my favorite resources. I mean, they've won games that were played in, the low to mid 90s in terms of pace. They've won games that are played well over 100 in terms of pace. Whereas I feel like Indiana needs that pace to be fast. We saw that in the Knicks series, right? The game that they dropped, Game 5, was played at a snail's pace, and all of a sudden it's back up in Game 6. So to me, OKC has more ways that they can win individual games, more ways that they can win this series. Whereas I think Indiana feels like they need to push that pace. When you look at that game one total, my concern here is that we do get the OKC defensive blitz, right? And I'm not necessarily worried about the Thunder holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to scoring, but if you like that over, I worry about Indiana, putting up something like 94 points.
Well, so I think it's first the road things, Matt, right? Again, like they've struggled on the road, but I also think it's just the role players. Look, for a stretch in this postseason, I think most of us were asking, is Jalen Williams like really their second best player? Outside of that Denver game where he finally hits a big shot, I think it was game 6 at Denver. I can't remember which one it was on the road, that left corner 3. He's been really bad, especially away from home. These role players have not shown up. Going into the closeout game against Minnesota, this is a team whose role players had really failed. I mean, Chet Holmgren, his shooting numbers were down away from home. Jalen Williams, as we mentioned, his shooting numbers just across the board were absolutely terrible, and especially away from home. Nobody's really showing up to help Shai Gilgeous-Alexander out. And so I think it starts with those two really key factors, right? It's the fact that Oklahoma City just struggles again away from home, that the role players don't really show up. And the other part is, look, what if Indiana, like postseason, as you guys well know, it's still inherently a small sample size, right? We're still just talking about 16 wins is what you need to get this thing done. And for 16 games, Indiana can still just shoot the hell out of the ball and potentially win. And I think that's going to be part of it too. Like if Indiana wins this series, we are going to look at, I think, at some incredible offensive numbers, because if they're going to get into a grind with OKC, I don't think that's going to be good for them. But if they're just shooting the lights out again for a series, or at least for 4 games, I think that's what we're going to be talking about too.
Haliburton minus 125 to lead the series in threes. You have Nesmith plus 425. Lou Dort 6-1. Rebounding is interesting. Holmgren versus Hartenstein. Holmgren minus 185. He out-rebounded Hartenstein in the Western Conference Finals. Hartenstein plus 195. Those are the two that probably are the most competitive. SGA, a massive favorite to lead the series in points. Haliburton minus 900 to lead in assists. Anything you like in that three-pointer or rebounding market with the individual players?
Yeah, I think both of those are interesting. 3 specifically because you have Tyrese Haliburton as a modest favorite, and then the next 2 guys on the list are role players, right? And I think that speaks to one of the general trends heading into this final series, which is that neither of these teams are overly dependent on the 3-point shot. They don't live and die by it. They tend to avoid these feast or famine type of games that, say, Minnesota seemed like it had. Every other game they're either shooting 45% from 3 or 28% from 3, and I think that's a big part of the reason why these teams are ultimately in the finals. One thing to note with OKC, Ben, is that they are shooting 33.5% from 3 as a team and are still 12-4 in the postseason. So you do wonder if that comes around at some point in this series. I don't know that I love Haliburton at minus 125. I think I have to be getting plus money on that. OKC specifically is so well equipped to slow down guards, right? I mean, we saw that, and arguably a more dynamic individual player in the Western Conference Finals, and Anthony Edwards, had 3 games in that series where it just felt like he couldn't do anything. And Tyrese Haliburton, even when he's rolling, can sometimes be a little bit reticent when it comes to shooting the ball. I mean, they only played OKC twice, of course, in the regular season. One of those games, he was completely shut down. I think he took only 6 or 8 shots total. So Haliburton is one of those guys that, he can shoot the 3. He shoots it well, but he's reluctant to do so. I don't know that the volume is necessarily going to be there throughout this series. I think you have to look at Nesmith at plus 425.